I can still remember the joy I felt when Kellen and I finally closed on our first home. After years of scrimping and saving, the small ranch-style house was ours, our little slice of the American dream. As we stood in the living room, champagne glasses in hand, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of all the memories we'd create here. Can you believe it, Briar? We actually did it. Kellen's eyes sparkled with excitement, pulling me close. I know, it feels surreal. I leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment. This was our fresh start, a chance to build the life we've always wanted. Just as we were about to take another sip, a loud knock at the door shattered the tranquility. Kellen gave me a quizzical look before going to answer it. When he pulled the door open, his face went pale. Mom, what are you doing here? Marjorie, Kellen's mother, stood on our doorstep, suitcases in hand. Her usually pristine appearance was disheveled, and her eyes were red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. Oh, Kellen, I'm in such terrible trouble. She reached out, gripping his arm. I've lost my home. I have nowhere else to go. I watched the color drain from Kellen's face as he processed her words. Instinctively, he stepped aside, allowing Marjorie to enter. She bustled in, surveying the room with a critical eye. This is a lovely little place you've got here. Her gaze landed on me, and a slight frown creased her brow. Briar. Hello, Marjorie. I forced a smile, my mind racing. This was the last thing we needed, especially on a day when we should be celebrating. Marjorie set down her bags and turned to Kellen, her expression one of utter distress. I've been through such an ordeal, my dear. My house, gone. All because of that scoundrel of an ex-husband of mine. He left me with nothing but debt. Kellen's brow furrowed with concern. What happened? Oh, it's just a terrible, terrible mess. Marjorie dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. I tried to keep up with the payments, but the bills just kept piling up, and then they foreclosed on the house. I have nowhere to go, Kellen. I'm so ashamed to even be here, imposing on you and Briar, but I have no choice. I watched the interaction with growing unease. Something about Marjorie's story didn't quite add up. While she seemed genuinely distraught, there was an undercurrent of manipulation in her tone, a calculated vulnerability that set off alarm bells in my mind. Kellen glanced at me, his expression torn. Mom, I don't know what to say. Of course you can stay with us, but... Oh, thank you, Kellen. Marjorie swept him into a tight embrace, cutting him off. I knew I could count on my darling boy. You've always been such a good son. As she pulled away, her gaze met mine, and I saw a flash of something I couldn't quite place. A subtle triumph, perhaps, or a hint of calculating calculation. Marjorie had a way of making every situation about her, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no exception. Kellen placed a hand on my shoulder, looking at me with pleading eyes. Briar, I know this is sudden, but she's my mother. I have to help her. I understood the weight of his words, the sense of obligation he felt towards Marjorie. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder, was she truly in need, or was there something more sinister at play? The following weeks were a blur of adjustments as Marjorie settled into our home. At first, I tried to be understanding, to make her feel welcome, but it soon became clear that she had no intention of making this a temporary arrangement. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of Marjorie clucking around the kitchen, critiquing my cooking and complaining about the state of the house. Briar, dear, did you remember to pick up the dry cleaning? And this kitchen, it's an absolute mess. How do you expect to keep a proper home? I grit my teeth, forcing a smile. I've been a bit busy, Marjorie, but I'll make sure to get it done. Kellen would shoot me an apologetic look, but he never seemed to stand up to his mother's constant barrage of criticism. As the days wore on, the tension in our home grew palpable. Marjorie had a way of inserting herself into every aspect of our lives, questioning my decisions and undermining my relationship with Kellen. Kellen, darling, don't you think it's time you and Briar start thinking about having a baby? You're not getting any younger, you know. She would sk and shake her head, her eyes narrowing in my direction. I bristled at the implication, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. Kellen and I will start a family when we're ready, Marjorie, not on your schedule. Oh, my dear, I'm only looking out for you. You don't want to miss your chance, do you? She patted my arm, her touch making my skin crawl. Kellen would quickly interject, trying to defuse the situation. Mom, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Briar and I are happy as we are." But Marjorie would simply wave a hand dismissively. Of course, I'm just trying to help. Help my foot." I knew Marjorie's true intent was to undermine my relationship with Kellen, to drive a wedge between us, and it was working, slowly but surely. One evening, as Kellen and I lay in bed, the tension finally boiled over. "Briar, I know my mom can be a lot to handle, but she's going through a difficult time. Can't you just try to be a little more understanding?" I propped myself up on one elbow, staring at him in disbelief. "Kellen, she's been nothing but critical and manipulative since she's been here. Don't you see what she's doing?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, but she's my mother. I can't just kick her out." "I'm not asking you to kick her out," I said, frustration seeping into my voice. "I'm asking you to stand up to her, to set some boundaries. This isn't sustainable, Kellen. She's slowly driving a wedge between us. I can't just abandon her, Briar. She has no one else. And what about us? Don't we matter?" I pressed my lips together, willing myself not to cry. "I feel like I'm losing you, Kellen, and it's all because of your mother." Kellen reached for me, but I pulled away. "I think I need some time to myself tonight." I slipped out of bed, grabbing my robe and heading for the door. "Briar, wait!" Kellen called after me, but I ignored him, needing the space to clear my head. As I stood in the dimly lit hallway, I could hear the muffled sound of Marjorie's voice drifting from the living room. No doubt she was already spinning some tale of woe, further ensnaring Kellen in her web of manipulation. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. Enough was enough. I had to find a way to get through to Kellen, to make him see the truth about his mother's true nature. Before it was too late. The tension in our home had reached a boiling point, and I knew something had to give. Marjorie's constant presence was slowly tearing Kellen and me apart, and I couldn't stand idly by any longer. One evening, as Kellen and I sat in the living room, Marjorie's icy gaze boring into me, I decided to confront the issue head-on. "Kellen, we need to talk." I turned to face him, my expression grave. Kellen glanced nervously between Marjorie and me. "What is it, Briar?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I can't keep living like this with your mother constantly undermining me and our relationship. It's got to stop." Marjorie's eyes widened, and she reached out to grasp Kellen's arm. "Kellen, darling, what is she talking about?" Kellen held up a hand, silencing her. "Let Briar speak, Mom." I shot Marjorie a pointed look. "I've been trying to be patient to make this work, but it's clear that your mother has no intention of leaving, and she's making my life a living hell." Marjorie's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes narrowing. "Briar, how dare you?" "No, Marjorie, it's my turn to speak." I cut her off, my voice firm. "I've discovered that you've been sabotaging my attempts to find a job. You've been calling potential employers, telling them not to hire me." Kellen's brow furrowed in confusion. "Briar, what are you talking about?" Marjorie let out a dramatic gasp. "Kellen, can you believe the accusations she's making? I would never do something so underhanded." I held up a hand, silencing her. "I have proof, Kellen. I've been investigating, and I've uncovered evidence of Marjorie's interference." Kellen turned to his mother, his expression pained. "Mom, is this true?" Marjorie's facade of innocence crumbled, and her eyes flashed with fury. "Kellen, you can't possibly believe her over your own mother. She's trying to turn you against me." "The only one trying to turn anyone against anyone is you, Marjorie," I said, my voice dripping with contempt. "You've been manipulating Kellen from the moment you set foot in this house." Kellen looked from Marjorie to me, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "I don't understand. Why would you do this, Mom?" Marjorie's lips curled into a sneer. "Because that woman has been nothing but trouble since the day she entered our lives. She's trying to take you away from me, Kellen. Can't you see that?" I shook my head in disgust. "This isn't about me, Marjorie. This is about your own selfish desires, your need to control and manipulate everyone around you." Kellen held up a hand, silencing us both. "Enough. I need time to process this." He stood, his gaze moving between Marjorie and me. "Briar, I don't know what to say. I need some time to think about this." My heart sank as I watched him leave the room, Marjorie's triumphant smile burning into my back. Once he was gone, I turned to Marjorie. My eyes narrowed. "This ends now, Marjorie. Either you leave or I do." Marjorie's expression darkened and she leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. You've made your choice, Briar, but mark my words, you'll regret this. I held her gaze, refusing to back down. We'll see about that. With that, I left the room, my mind racing. I had to find a way to get through to Kellen, to make him see the truth about his mother's manipulations. The stakes had never been higher. The days following my confrontation with Marjorie were tense and agonizing. Kellen had retreated into himself, torn between his loyalty to his mother and the mounting evidence of her deceitful nature. I knew I had to tread carefully, lest I risk losing him altogether. As I sat alone in the living room, struggling to focus on the book in my lap, the sound of the front door opening shattered the uneasy silence. Briar, we need to talk. I looked up to see Kellen, his expression unreadable. What is it? He moved closer, his brow furrowed. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said about Mom's behavior. I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. I've decided to confront her. I need to hear her side of the story. Relief and apprehension warred within me. Kellen, are you sure that's a good idea? Marjorie is not exactly known for her honesty, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I have to, Briar. She's my mother, and I need to understand what's really going on. Nodding, I rose to my feet, steeling myself for the impending confrontation. All right, let's do this. We found Marjorie in the kitchen, meticulously arranging the dishes in the cabinet. She turned as we entered, her expression shifting to one of concerned puzzlement. Kellen, Briar, what's going on? Kellen took a deep breath. Mom, Briar has made some allegations about your behavior. I need you to tell me the truth. Marjorie's eyes widened, and she clasped a hand over her heart. Allegations? Kellen, darling, what on earth are you talking about? The job sabotage, Mom. Briar says you've been calling her potential employers, telling them not to hire her. Kellen's voice was firm, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. Marjorie let out a gasp, her face crumpling in anguish. Oh, Kellen, how could you believe such awful things about me? I would never do something so underhanded. She reached out, grasping Kellen's arm. Your own mother, trying to undermine your wife? The very thought is simply unbearable. Kellen's expression softened, and he gently patted her hand. I want to believe you, Mom, but Briar seemed so certain. Do you have any explanation? Marjorie's eyes filled with tears, and she let out a shaky sigh. I suppose it's possible that someone has been impersonating me, trying to cause trouble, but I would never, ever do such a thing, Kellen. You must believe me. She turned to me, her gaze pleading. Briar, surely you can understand how devastating this has been for me, to be accused of such a horrible betrayal. I felt a pang of sympathy despite my better judgment. Marjorie had a way of making herself the victim, and Kellen seemed to be falling for it once again. Before I could respond, Marjorie let out a sudden gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Oh, dear. I don't feel well. Kellen was at her side in an instant, his face etched with concern. Mom? What's wrong? Marjorie swayed on her feet, her eyes fluttering. I think I'm having a heart attack, Kellen. Please call an ambulance. Kellen rushed to the phone, leaving me alone with Marjorie. She shot me a triumphant look, a cruel smile playing on her lips. In that moment, I knew I had been outmaneuvered. Marjorie had once again played the victim, manipulating Kellen's emotions and casting doubt on my accusations. As the sound of the ambulance siren filled the air, I felt a growing sense of dread. This was far from over. Marjorie had a new gambit, and I had to find a way to counter her before she destroyed everything. As I sat in the waiting room of the hospital, my mind raced with a whirlwind of emotions. Marjorie's sudden medical emergency had thrown everything into disarray, and I couldn't help but feel that she had orchestrated the entire scenario to her advantage. Kellen paced back and forth, his face etched with worry. The doctors say she's stable, but they want to keep her overnight for observation. I can't believe this is happening. I placed a hand on his arm, offering what comfort I could. I know, Kellen, this is a lot to take in. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. Briar, I need you to tell me the truth. Is there any chance what you said about Mom could be true? I hesitated, weighing my words carefully. Kellen, I know it's hard to believe, but I have solid evidence that Marjorie has been sabotaging my job search. She's been making calls, spreading lies about me. His brow furrowed, and he shook his head. But why would she do that? She's my mother, Briar. Surely you must be mistaken. I wish I was, Kellen. I sighed, squeezing his hand. But I've been investigating, and the proof is there. Marjorie has a history of manipulation and deceit. Kellen pulled away, his expression hardening. I can't accept that, Briar. My mother may have her faults, but she's not the kind of person you're describing. I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand, silencing me. I think you should go home. I need some time to process all of this. My heart sank, and I knew better than to argue. Kellen was too deeply entrenched in his loyalty to Marjorie to see the truth. I had to find another way to expose her. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. I knew I had to tread carefully, lest Marjorie turn Kellen against me completely. But I was determined to uncover the full extent of her deception. The next few days were a flurry of research and investigation. I scoured every available record, piecing together Marjorie's past, and what I uncovered was nothing short of shocking. It seemed that Marjorie's financial troubles were not the result of her ex-husband's misdeeds, as she had claimed. In fact, the records showed a pattern of reckless spending and hidden bank accounts, all funded by her late husband's life insurance policy. Armed with this information, I knew I had to confront Marjorie directly. As she sat in the living room, sipping her tea, I approached her, my resolve unwavering. Marjorie, we need to talk. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. What is it, Briar? I'm rather busy at the moment. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I've been doing some digging, and I've uncovered some very interesting information about your financial situation. Marjorie's face paled, and she set down her cup, her hands trembling. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb with me, Marjorie. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. I know about the hidden bank accounts, the money you've been siphoning from your late husband's life insurance policy. Her eyes widened, and she let out a nervous laugh. I don't know what you're talking about. You're making wild accusations. Am I? I pulled a stack of documents from my bag, tossing them onto the coffee table. These say otherwise. You've been lying to everyone, including Kellen, about your financial situation. Marjorie's facade crumbled, and she glared at me, her lips curled in a snarl. You have no right to pry into my personal affairs, you vindictive little... The only one being vindictive here is you, Marjorie. I cut her off, my voice laced with venom. You've been manipulating everyone around you, including your own son, all for your own selfish gain. Marjorie opened her mouth to retort, but I held up a hand, silencing her. This ends now. Either you leave this house, or I'll make sure Kellen and the authorities know the truth about your deceit. For a moment, Marjorie was silent, her eyes burning with rage. Then a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. Oh, Briar, you have no idea what you've just done. The air was thick with tension as Kellen, Marjorie, and I sat around the dining room table. I had called this meeting, determined to finally expose Marjorie's web of lies once and for all. Kellen shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze darting between Marjorie and me. All right, Briar, what's this all about? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Kellen, I've uncovered some things about your mother's financial situation that I think you need to know. Marjorie let out a dramatic sigh, placing a trembling hand on her chest. Oh, Kellen, darling, I don't know what she's going to say, but I can assure you it's nothing but lies and slander. Kellen frowned, glancing at his mother. Mom, please, let Briar speak. I pulled the documents I had gathered from my bag, laying them out on the table. These are bank statements, insurance records, and other financial documents I've obtained. They paint a very different picture than the one your mother has been presenting. Marjorie's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. Briar, I warned you not to pry into my personal affairs. You have no right to. I have every right, my gaze unwavering, because your deceit affects all of us, Marjorie, especially Kellen. Kellen's brow furrowed as he began sifting through the documents. What is all this? It shows that your mother has been squirreling away money from your father's life insurance policy into secret bank accounts, I explained, my voice steady. Contrary to her claims of financial ruin, she's been living quite comfortably on your father's legacy. Marjorie let out a harsh laugh, shaking her head. Kellen, you can't possibly believe this nonsense. I've been nothing but honest with you. Kellen's expression darkened as he continued to pore over the documents. Mom, these records, they seem to indicate that what Briar is saying is true. Marjorie's face flushed with anger, and she slammed her hand on the table. Kellen, you're going to believe this woman over your own mother? After everything I've done for you? Kellen held up a hand, silencing her. I'm not finished, Mom. He turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and betrayal. Briar, if all of this is true, why didn't you come to me with it sooner? I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. I tried, Kellen, but you were so blinded by your loyalty to your mother that you couldn't see the truth. I had to be sure before I confronted her. Marjorie let out a derisive snort. Kellen, don't be a fool. This woman is nothing but a manipulative shrew, trying to turn you against your own mother. Kellen's gaze darted between Marjorie and me, his expression torn. I don't know what to believe anymore. Seeing that Kellen was still wavering, I knew I had to take drastic action. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out a small recording device and set it on the table. Kellen, I think it's time you heard the truth from your mother's own words. I pressed play, and a familiar voice filled the room, dripping with smug satisfaction. Can you believe that idiot Briar actually thinks she can expose me? As if I'd let some upstart ruin everything I've worked for. With Kellen wrapped around my finger, there's no way she can touch me. Marjorie's eyes widened in horror as the recording played, and she let out a strangled gasp. No, this can't be happening. Kellen's face was a mask of stunned disbelief as he listened to his mother's damning words. When the recording ended, he turned to Marjorie, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. Mom, how could you? The room was consumed by stunned silence as Kellen stared at his mother, his face a mask of betrayal and disbelief. Marjorie, for once, seemed to have lost her veneer of control, her eyes darting around the table in a futile attempt to find an escape. Kellen's voice was low and measured as he spoke. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't do all of this. Marjorie's lips parted, but no words came out. She fidgeted uncomfortably in her seat, her usual confidence shattered. Well? Kellen pressed, his fingers gripping the edge of the table. Explain yourself. Marjorie's gaze flickered to me, and I could see the fury burning in her eyes. Kellen, you can't seriously be buying into her lies. This is all a setup, a scheme to turn you against me. A setup? Kellen scoffed, his voice laced with contempt. The evidence is right here, Mom. Your own words condemn you. Marjorie's expression shifted, and suddenly she looked small and fragile. Kellen, please, you have to understand. I was only trying to protect you. That woman has been nothing but trouble since she came into our lives. I felt a surge of disgust at her pathetic attempt to play the victim. Protect him? You've been manipulating and deceiving both of us from the start, Marjorie. All for your own selfish gain. Marjorie's eyes narrowed, and she leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. You've got a lot of nerve, Briar. After all I've done for this family, you have the audacity to accuse me of such things. Kellen held up a hand, silencing us both. Enough. I don't want to hear any more of your excuses, Mom. He shook his head, his expression hardening. I'm disgusted. Disgusted that you would stoop so low that you would lie and cheat your way through life all while claiming to be the victim. Marjorie's face contorted with rage, and she slammed her fist on the table. How dare you, Kellen? I am your mother, and you owe me everything. This is how you repay me? Kellen stood, his chair scraping against the floor. No, Mother, I owe you nothing, not after what you've done. Marjorie's eyes widened in panic as Kellen moved towards the door. Kellen, wait, where are you going? To speak with a lawyer, he replied, his voice steady. I'm going to make sure you pay for your crimes and that you never come near Briar or me again. Marjorie's face drained of color and she scrambled to her feet. Kellen, you can't do this! I'm your mother, for God's sake! Kellen paused at the doorway, his expression hardening. You stopped being my mother the moment you betrayed me and our family. You're dead to me, Marjorie. With that, he turned and left, the echo of the front door slamming resounding through the silent house. Marjorie stood there, her hands trembling, her eyes wild with a mixture of fury and desperation. Suddenly, she rounded on me, her voice shrill. This is all your fault, you vile woman. You've poisoned my son against me, and now you'll pay for it. I stood my ground, refusing to back down. Your actions are the only thing that have poisoned your relationship with Kellen, Marjorie. You have no one to blame but yourself. Marjorie let out a strangled cry of frustration before storming out of the room, leaving me alone to contemplate the aftermath of our confrontation. As I sat there, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, tinged with a hint of apprehension. Marjorie had been cornered, her lies exposed, but I knew she wouldn't give up without a fight. The battle was far from over. In the aftermath of our confrontation with Marjorie, the world seemed to shift, as if a heavy cloud had been lifted from our lives. Kellen, once torn between his loyalty to his mother and the undeniable truth, had made the difficult decision to cut ties with her. As we sat together one evening, sipping tea in the living room of our new home, Kellen let out a deep sigh. I can't believe it's finally over. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that my own mother could be so deceitful. I reached out, squeezing his hand. I know, Kellen, it must be devastating, but you did the right thing. She's caused us enough pain. He nodded, his expression somber. I just wish it hadn't come to this, but I can't trust her, not after everything she's done. I leaned in, resting my head on his shoulder. You don't owe her anything, Kellen. She brought this upon herself. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the past few months lifting from our shoulders. It had been a long and arduous journey, but we had emerged stronger, our bond forged in the crucible of Marjorie's machinations. So what now? Kellen asked, a glimmer of hope in his voice. I smiled, reaching up to caress his cheek. Now, we focus on our future, a future without Marjorie's shadow looming over us. Kellen's lips curled into a smile, and he pulled me into a warm embrace. I liked the sound of that. In the weeks that followed, we set about creating the life we had always dreamed of, free from Marjorie's manipulative grasp. We found a new home, far from the memories of our previous one, and began to rebuild our lives. As I stood in the kitchen of our cozy little house, watching Kellen unpack the last of the boxes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace wash over me. We had weathered the storm and emerged stronger for it. It feels good to be home, Kellen said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back, savoring his warmth. It does, and it feels even better knowing that Marjorie can't taint this place with her presence. Kellen chuckled, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple. You got that right. She'll never set foot in our home again if I have anything to say about it. I turned in his embrace, gazing up at him with a smile. I'm just glad we're finally free of her and her manipulations. Now we can focus on our future, on starting a family of our own. Kellen's eyes lit up, and he pulled me closer. Speaking of which, I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about taking that next step with you. My heart swelled with love and hope. Really? He nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. Really, I want nothing more than to build a life with you, Briar. No more interference, no more drama, just us. I felt a surge of emotion, my eyes welling with happy tears. Then let's do it, Kellen. Let's start that family we've been dreaming of. Kellen leaned in, capturing my lips in a passionate kiss. In that moment, I knew that our future was bright, untainted by the shadows of the past. Marjorie's reign of terror was over, and we were free to create the life we deserved. As we pulled apart, Kellen's gaze locked with mine, his expression filled with unwavering love and determination. I love you, Briar, and I can't wait to see what the future holds.